Hi. Hello, second class of my mom. Sorry, it's taken me a long time to reply. Hopefully you can hear this and it doesn't sound too bad. I typed out all of your questions and I wrote some answers down, and I'm just going to read those to you. So, the first question from Alberto: how do you drink water in space? This one, there's a few questions that were similar to this, but essentially for liquids, have you ever had a Capri Sun? You know how it's kind of like a little bag kind of thing, and you just stick a straw in it? Well, there are actually specially made astronaut bags that have the straw built in, and there's liquids in there, so you just squeeze it. Almost like if you were squeezing like a toothpaste tube, and you squeeze it to get all the liquids out. Haley asks, how do you sleep in space? Astronauts have their own kind of sleeping bag, and they have like a special system with like Velcro, and so they can stick it to the wall so they don't just float away. Also, they a lot of times use sleeping masks and like alarm clocks to wake up, because they orbit the Earth. What did it say? They have like, I don't know, maybe 24 sunrises and sunsets every day. So it's probably really hard to sleep if there's all that light and stuff. So they close the windows or put a curtain down if possible, maybe put a mask on, and sleep stuck to the wall. Ellie says, what does the Milky Way look like in space? Well, space is really big, so it depends on where you are in space. But I'm going to just assume that you mean like we're somewhere out in space, but pretty close to Earth, like between the Earth and the Moon. And even pretty much anywhere in the solar system, the Milky Way is going to look pretty similar, because the Milky Way is really big, way bigger than our solar system. So it'll look kind of like what it looks like from Earth. But way brighter, because you won't have all the light pollution of the planet that you're on. And if you want to see pictures, you can look up some really beautiful astrophotography pictures online, and you can see what the Milky Way looks like. The Milky Way is our galaxy that we're in, so when we look at it, we're looking at it from being inside of it. So if you were to be somewhere in space that was outside of the Milky Way galaxy, then you would be able to see it and kind of look in from the outside. It looks like a lot of stars. Patton asked, is there earthquakes on Mars? Are there earthquakes? Well, first of all, I looked up all these answers, and experts like to call them Mars quakes. But it's kind of a no and yes answer. No, Mars does not have earthquakes in the same way that Earth does. And that's because our planet has something called plate tectonics, where the plates that are on the surface of the Earth are kind of sliding around and moving over and under each other. And a lot of earthquakes happen from that. Mars does not have plate tectonics, but there's other ways that the ground could shake. Like from if the planet gets suddenly a lot colder, then it contracts and the crust starts to crack, and that could shake the Earth, or shake the Mars, shake the ground a little bit from that. And maybe there's magma in the center of Mars, and if that pushes up like the kind of force that you would see in a volcano on Earth, then that force of magma rising could cause a Mars quake. But we're actually not fully sure yet, and if you have noticed in the news recently, there was a lander that just made it successfully to Mars, and it's called the InSight Mars lander, and it has an instrument on it, a seismometer, that's going to measure any possible Mars quakes. Well, the third way that you could get a Mars quake is if you had big rocks, meteors and meteorites that hit the planet, then it could maybe shake it from that. The next one, Hannah asks, what do you eat in space? Actually, there's a bunch of different, I have an answer here, but then I found out that there's different answers. It used to just be that they would make like freeze-dried astronaut food that you would just add water into. and it would be in a similar tube as the liquids. And you just add some hot water if you want to warm it up. But apparently, there's even more things to eat in space and ways to eat. And now there's stuff that can come in like cans or wrapped in aluminum foil. I even saw videos of some astronauts making pizzas, and apparently there's like an oven up there you can use to warm up your food with. I recommend for all of you asking these questions to go into Google and especially on YouTube and ask these, because I saw a lot of really cool videos that astronauts have put together. One of them was Chris Hadfield, who was a Canadian astronaut, and he was doing videos of how to make sandwiches in space, and he talked about how they use tortillas instead of bread because then you don't have crumbs in the same way. So if you want to go on YouTube, you can find Chris Hadfield making a peanut butter and honey tortilla sandwich. Bryn Lee asks, what company do you work for and what do they do? This is my work badge. I guess it might be backwards. I work for a company called Spaceflight Industries, and we do a few different things. One thing that we do is we have a couple satellites that are orbiting the Earth, and if anyone wants to have a picture taken from one of those satellites, then we will talk to the satellite and like rotate it and aim it just in the right location to take that picture. And then we give them the picture and they give us some money for that. But the part of the company I work for helps to launch small satellites on rockets. So we get a bunch of small satellite customers together and we create a structure that they all are attached to. And then we talk to a company like SpaceX and we put all of those satellites on a SpaceX rocket and we launch it. Next one, Lucille says, do you know anything about Jupiter? Jupiter is my favorite planet. It is a really cool planet. It's the largest planet in our solar system. It's a gas giant. Apparently it has 67 moons. It has a magnetic field that is 14 times stronger than Earth's. And one of the things I really like about Jupiter is that it acts like a guardian in our solar system because it's so massive. It has a lot of gravity. Anything that's coming into our solar system, like a comet from outside of it, a lot of those things get stuck in Jupiter's orbit. And that means that Jupiter protects us from a lot more meteors and impacts that could be devastating, that could totally annihilate life on Earth. Luckily, because of Jupiter, a lot of that stuff never comes to the inner solar system. Lily asks, when something gets sucked into a black hole, where does it all go? And we're not really sure yet because we've never been inside a black hole and we've never sent anything inside a black hole because the closest black hole to us that we know of is inside the very center of our Milky Way galaxy, and it's really, really far away. Some people, so the standard idea that a lot of people used to think is that once something gets sucked into a black hole, then it's just gone forever and it gets torn into tinier and tinier pieces. Some people think that maybe some black holes with special and specific properties, that maybe some black holes are actually like wormholes and they lead to somewhere else if you traveled in them. But we still aren't sure yet. Maybe we could find out someday. Cody asks, would you die if you ran out of oxygen in space? Yes. That's the short answer. Of all the different things that are living on our planet, we can put all of them into two groups. For the purpose of this question, and they are aerobic and anaerobic. And aerobic means that it uses oxygen. And almost everything that you've probably ever come into contact with, plants and animals and bugs, humans, dogs, they all use oxygen for processes, the biochemical processes that happen. There are some kinds of bacteria and really tiny organisms that are anaerobic and they don't need oxygen, but most of life on Earth needs oxygen. So pretty much if you put anything out into space that's aerobic and needs oxygen, even if it's a plant or an insect, then it will die. Except apparently water bears. But they have a special process where they sort of hibernate and make their skin like a glass substance that traps all of their oxygen inside. Those are really interesting creatures, so you should look up those. Kyle says, is a Milky Way a portal for another universe? No. The Milky Way is the name for our galaxy, and there are billions or trillions or who knows how many galaxies in our universe. However, like I said before, it could be that the supermassive black hole at the center of our galaxy may be like a portal to somewhere else, but we're not really sure about that. Brooklyn asks, what is the name of a rocket you have made or worked on? My company doesn't make rockets, but we help satellites fly on rockets, and the one that I helped launch in early December was a Falcon 9 rocket that's made by SpaceX. Very cool. But apparently there's a lot of rocket companies that are being created and making rockets now. So we might work with a lot of other companies as well. Chase asks, how do the decouplers decouple? So you're talking about the satellite deployer systems. And there's a lot of different styles that are out there. Different companies make their own styles. One of them is kind of like, imagine like like a mailbox, like a shoebox or a mailbox, but more like a mailbox because it has like the long area and then the flap opens up. And then you would stick a small like rectangular satellite in there, and as you like push it into the system, it pushes back on a bunch of springs that hold it, and when you keep the lid in, then it just stays in there, but it's super like under the tension of the springs. And then we send an electrical signal to it, and the door opens, and then it just pushes it out. That's one style. But there are several different styles. I bet you could Google satellite deployment systems if you wanted to learn about more. Jackson asks, what is the biggest galaxy that we know of? Well, apparently there is one that's located almost 1 billion light years away. And they just gave it a name that's just like letters and numbers, and it's IC1101. It's the single largest galaxy that's ever been found in our observable universe. That's important because we can't see everything that's in the universe. So this is only the biggest one we found and what we've been able to see. And it is 2 million light years across and has 100 trillion stars in it. It's really big. Caitlin asks, how do you take a shower in space? Where does the water go? This is another cool video you can find on YouTube of astronauts demonstrating and talking about it. So the simple answer is, instead of having a shower, astronauts do something that's kind of like a sponge bath. They have little tubes, the same ones they use for water and food, and they have ones that have liquid soap in them, and they put the soap on their skin, and then they maybe use their hand or like a washcloth to like lather it in. But then instead of rinsing it off, they use something like wet wipes or just a little bit of water and kind of just like brush it off. So maybe not as much fun. And that way you don't really have to use a lot of water, and the water doesn't have to go anywhere. Aaliyah asks, what was the first rocket ship you got to fly in? I have never been on a rocket ship. There's not a lot of astronauts that go on them. A lot of the space industry, especially for the company I'm working on, just sends satellites and like machines and things like that out in space. But I actually do have a private pilot's license, which means I can fly airplanes, and I learned how to fly on a Piper Warrior single-engine land airplane. So it's not exactly a rocket ship, but it's pretty cool anyway. Tatum asked, how do you eat in space? So here's a similar question to the one earlier. And here is a quote. Space food may be canned or wrapped in aluminum foil. It may be freeze-dried, low moisture, pre-cooked, or dehydrated. Dehydrated foods need to have water added. Ovens are provided to warm foods to the proper temperature. And again, you should look at this video of astronauts eating pizza in space. It's pretty cool. Caitlin M. asks, how long does it take to build a rocket ship? Well, now that there's a lot of companies out there making rocket ships, that answer, there's actually a few different answers. It depends on how big or small the rocket ship is and how complex it is, and if it's going to just send up satellites or if it's going to send up people. Because the rocket ship that I worked on that we launched at the beginning of December didn't need to have food in it for astronauts or showering stuff or anything like that. It was way less complicated. So SpaceX, for example, needs 18 months to build a Falcon 9 rocket. That's a year and a half. But some rocket ships that are more complicated can take up to 5 years to build. And this doesn't even include all the time that it took to design it and to figure out how exactly you're going to do it. That's like years and years even before then. It's a long time. Aiden asked, what's your favorite thing about working on a rocket? Actually, one of my favorite things I've enjoyed about this job is troubleshooting, which is trying to figure out how to fix something when it breaks. Even if I didn't break it, if it just broke on its own. I feel like I can learn so much about how something works and doesn't work when it breaks and then trying to fix it. I really like fixing broken things. Usually we don't want things to break, but the truth is that especially when you're designing new technology parts and putting things together, that things break a lot. And so you learn so much more from fixing broken things than just having things never break. Andrew asks, why does Saturn have rings? Well, we're not really sure how they formed. We're still looking into that. And actually, the Cassini space probe was launched. I don't remember when it was launched, but it made it all the way to Saturn by about 2007, and it spent, or maybe 2006. And maybe 2004. Sorry, I'm looking at my notes. 2004. And it stayed around Saturn, orbiting it for 13 years until finally in 2017, it decided to crash into the atmosphere of Saturn. And so it took a lot of pictures and recorded a lot of data, and we learned more about Saturn's rings. We learned that they're only 100 million years old, which means the Earth formed 4.5 billion years ago, and I think all the planets formed around the same time. So the rings are way, way younger than the rest of the planet. And we think that one hypothesis is that there were two moons that crashed into each other, and they just kept being torn apart into smaller and smaller chunks. A lot of the rings are made out of like icy material, and most of what it is just really small rocks, like even this big or tinier, maybe like as big as a basketball. So they're not solid materials. It's just like a bunch of debris that orbits in a really thin plane. It's kind of cool. Brooklyn H asks, what is a rocket ship made out of? Well, when you're gonna make your own rocket ship, you have to think about all the different physics stuff that comes into play. And two things that are really important for a rocket is that it has to be strong enough to withstand all the forces of like the jets, all the stuff that's coming out of it and being able to lift in space. So it has to be really strong material, but it also has to be really light, because the heavier something is, the more fuel you need to lift it off, and it becomes really expensive. So for now, we've been using aluminum and titanium to build rocket ships. A lot of rocket ships are made from aluminum and titanium, but we'd love to try to use like carbon composites in the future, other things that are easier to make. We have way more carbon accessible on Earth than we do aluminum and titanium. And maybe we could, actually there's a company that we've been talking to that wants to 3D print rockets. So maybe if you use a carbon composite, you can 3D print rockets. I wonder if you could do that with aluminum. I don't know. And the last question, Aiden D asks, how do you poop in space? Okay, so this is an interesting one that I looked at, and this has changed over time as well. When the space age started, the space race in like the 60s, what they did is made these plastic bags that's really sticky on the entrance, and you have to stick that to your butt and poop in it. But now they have a better system that they use for both pee and poop, and it is essentially like a vacuum tube. Like imagine the hose on a vacuum cleaner, and that you can stick wherever you need to, so you could stick that on your butt and turn it on, and while you're pooping it sucks everything up, and that way it stores it out of the way, and you can put it in bags that aren't in the way. They're like in a hidden compartment or something. And then if any of you have ever seen the movie The Martian, Mark Watney gets all of those bags of stored poop and he uses them as fertilizer for his plants. I don't know, we haven't done that yet. Obviously we haven't gone to Mars, we haven't had to use our poop as fertilizer. And apparently there's a bunch of bags of poop left on the moon from the astronauts who went out there. And apparently also if you have to go on an EVA extravehicular, I don't remember what EVA is, but it's the name for when that you have to do a spacewalk, then you can't access that hose. So then they just made very fancy space diapers for astronauts. That does not sound good. Anyway, that's all of my questions. Thank you for asking. Again, please go to YouTube and you can type in any of these questions. And I bet you're gonna find videos for a lot of this where it's not only being explained by an expert, but you can see it in action. NASA really loves to create these videos to educate kids and other people. And astronauts are always sharing videos of all the strange stuff they have to do out there. All right, have a good day.